think a lot of people are kind of scared to do anything at the moment, or, maybe scared to like start a new business. The rest of the world's kind of on pause. So if you can jump in and start creating something, there's a lot of opportunity in that. They can generate traction. It's kind of like any startup. You can prove product market fit, then yeah, you'll get funding.
All right, we are live again. Welcome to session 3 of Create Online. This is a series of weekly conversations that we're doing with technologists in the startup world. I'm Duncan Davidson, and behind the scenes, I have my colleague, Simona Cotin. Let's pull her up on screen. And my keyboard's not working, so this is pretty awesome. We'll try to fumble our way through here. Anyway, Simona is here helping me out, and today we have Brian Fitzpatrick. Now, I always have a hard time saying his full name, because I know him as Fitz, and I've known him as Fitz for better part of 20 years now. We met a long time ago when he was working on this version control system. And, Git isn't the only version control system in the universe. There's this thing before it, and several others before it, but the big thing was Subversion before it. And Fitz and some other folks worked on that in response to having done too much work on CVS before that. And if you know what CVS is, then you've been around a while. Fast forward, and Fitz went to work for Google and established a Chicago engineering office at Google, built the team up from just a few people to tons. And one of the big things he worked on there was the data liberation front, where if you want to get your data out of Google, Brian's team was the one that built that, and I believe it's called Google Takeout. But if you've ever sucked your email out of Gmail or whatever, that's him and his team. And then after Google, Fitz went off and did a startup, and let me bring him up and have him talk about it. Hi, Fitz.
Hi. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Whatever,
depending on what time zone you're in.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of time zones, and there's the world's round. Can you imagine that?
Wait,
what? What? I hear there's these people that think it might not be. Anyway, so after Google, you went to form a little company. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I spent about a better part of 10 years at Google, and I was having a great time. And this idea of Tock came up. My partner, Nick Kokonis, had been talking about, time-slotted application for businesses for years, and working in not just ordinary reservations, but prepay and all this stuff for restaurants. And I got really excited about it. And that's it's always excited to go towards something rather than away for something. And, we started Tock in December 2014 with a small team of 4 people. And now we're around 100 folks, and we've got thousands of restaurants. And we're just doing something that nobody else is doing out there, which is free reservations, deposits, prepay, events, now pickup and delivery, and variable pricing and all this sort of stuff. All this, basically, any way you want to run a hospitality business and interact with your guests, you can do it all through our app. And so it's been really excited to build something completely from scratch.
That's really cool. And how did you actually arrive at the idea of doing something of or working with the caliber of restaurants that you're working with, rather than say, just going up against OpenTable, making reservations for Chili's or something?
Well, I mean, we started off, so my partner, Nick, again, the person who came up with the idea, he owns Alinea, one of the best restaurants in the world, Michelin 3-star restaurant here in Chicago. It's an incredible experience, now doing takeout. And they had a problem, which was that they were booked solid 5-6 months in advance. They had 5 people who were taking reservations. Or taking reservations, I mean, most of the time saying, no, I'm sorry, that's not available. No, I'm sorry, that's not available. And he said, and on top of all that, they still had an 8 or 9% no-show rate. And Nick used to be a derivatives trader back in the 90s, and he's like, there's so much demand here. Like, we clearly, there's a better way we can do this. If people prepay, they're going to be more likely to show up. So we can get people in seats who really want to be there versus get people making reservations who aren't necessarily going to come, A. And B, everybody wants to come Friday and Saturday night at 7 and 8. But very few people want to go up at Tuesday at 5. So why don't we try doing variable pricing? That makes sense, right? You ever go to a ball game, a baseball game, for example, and here in Chicago, big Cubs fan, you sit in the second row, and people paid $300 for a second row ticket. They're never really sitting there looking up at the nosebleed saying, "Oh God, I got ripped off." Those guys only paid $60 for their ticket. So what he instituted was a variable pricing when he first launched this sort of predecessor to Tock back in 2011. And it turns out people are happy to pay more for a Friday night or Saturday night and then pay less for a Tuesday at 5 or something like that. So everybody winds up fairly happy. And what happens is your book fills up very evenly versus the giant bell curve that you typically see on the weekend as well as at 7 or 8 o'clock. So there's typically 2 crossover peaks in that graph.
So it's like,
yeah.
In cloud terms, we'd call that, reserved instances versus on demand and balancing out the curve and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's when you have excess demand, use that to basically improve things everywhere. If you don't have excess demand, then you should just do ordinary reservations, just like everyone else. But the challenge really is that 15 to 20% of people that make reservations don't necessarily honor those. So find a way to treat those 15 to 20% in a way that discourages them from making a booking so that you have more room for the folks that are actually going to show up. And so this is good not just for restaurants because you can save money on labor, you can save lots of money on food waste, right? But it's good for guests because you're not paying for that food waste. You're not paying for that empty seat for somebody that didn't show up. And you get there at 7 and you don't get the whole, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Davidson, your table's not quite ready. Why don't you go rot in the bar for 55 minutes and have a bunch of drinks? And by the time your table's actually ready, you're going to be so wasted that we could serve you cat food and you wouldn't know the difference."
And that's actually the thing I hate most when I go to a restaurant is I have to do the waiting, and especially you go to some place that serves chips and salsa at the bar. I'm
just
done,
doomed,
right? I eat my fill on chips and salsa, and it's over.
Yeah, and it's super enraging when you've made the reservation. Like I made the reservation for 7 o'clock. I showed up at 7 o'clock, and my table's not ready. So this sort of puts both sides have something in the game here, so to speak, and just makes it better. And the same thing goes if you ever go into a restaurant and the party of 6 and you have one friend that's always late and they're like, "Sorry, we only seat full parties." That's because they're trying to squeeze that extra few minutes out of that table. So what you're trying to do is squeeze that you can out of this peak instead of broadening it out and getting things below what your supply threshold is. So it's a really cool way to think about it. And then on top of that, to bring this hospitality flair to it, to bring this feeling of really good hospitality, really, really caring for guests and basically trying to disintermediate restaurants and their guests and get out of the way so they can have a relationship directly with them. And that means a robust CRM system that goes across all restaurants in a group so that if you show up at, for example, if you show up at Next, which is another one of Nick's restaurants, but you've never been there, but you've been to Alinea twice, they'll see that you're a regular or you've been there a couple of times and they'll be like, "Oh, well, this person's already kind of knows what's going on." And, "Oh, I can see in their guest notes they're left-handed. I also see that they prefer sparkling water." So you can sort of make that little magic happen. The kind of magic that happened back in the 50s with the maitre d' who, was there for 20 years and knew everyone. Mm-hmm. And so now this sort of broadens that out and basically makes for a better experience overall.
Cool. And I mean, I want to get more into the technical CTO level stuff in a minute, but what have you noticed that the overall customer experience is actually a little bit different? One thing I noticed now that I live in Europe is when I go back to the States, I feel almost a little bit pushed at restaurants because there is that emphasis on how do we get to the next table? How do we do whatever? How do you think the customer experience has been improved this way, or does it feel better for them?
I think it feels better. I think it feels less rushed because when you're not trying to jam everything into that peak time and you've got people booking all the way to what they call your shoulders, the earlier and the later hours, then you don't have to rush people. Right. You really don't have to. And when you get to, again, we started at the higher end because I thought we're going to build all this really cool stuff for high-end restaurants. Think of I hesitate to use Tesla as an example these days, given, how their founder is kind of acting, but they started with a super fancy Roadster, right? Which is the cool, neat, fast, zippy car. And then they moved into the S and then the X and then the Y, whatever, all this different stuff, the 3, et cetera. But they they sort of work their way down market. And so we built all these really cool features like that work really great and that help better hospitality for high-end restaurants. And those really apply to restaurants all the way down the line. And so we can give folks this stuff for free. You ever go to a restaurant and you do a coat check and they give you some like either a ticket or some grubby plastic thing with a number on it that who knows how many people have been screwing with it. At Tock, we just simply added a coat hanger button. And when someone checks in, you just mark a coat hanger button. And then every table in a restaurant has a number. Fun fact. Mm-hmm. People know to go take this to table 11, position 3, whatever. And so you just have a bunch of hangers that are numbered the same as your tables, and you hang up the coat. And then when people pay, you notice that they're changed to pay. You stage the coat, you get ready. They come up, you hand them their coat as they're leaving. And people are like, wow. I did, when I was first starting this, I staged at a bunch of restaurants because I didn't have restaurant experience. Staging is like a day internship or something. And I was working the door at one of Nick's bars, the Alinea, which is this very fancy high-end lounge. And, people would finish, we would see that they paid, we'd get their coats ready, we'd see someone walking up, we would know which party it was because they're the ones that just paid. We would hold their coats up and they'd come up and they maybe had a few drinks, shall we say, and they'd be like, how did you know this was my coat? They were just utterly astounded. It was a little bit of magic. Now, mind you, helped a little bit by a couple of drinks there, but it's lots and lots of little things like that, little details. The details I think are what matter, and the things that can bring magic to this type of thing, and that's what really equals a better experience.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing that thinking about it from a geek perspective, you know that you have these events happening in the lifetime of a table, right? It's going through a pretty normal cycle of states, and you can almost treat it as a state machine. And just paying attention to that state machine can make all the difference in the world. And why restaurants don't do more of that is a bit bizarre. But being in your position, you can actually help that along a little bit.
Yeah, and we can help lay out the bookings in your restaurant to sort of to take advantage of the fact that we know roughly how long a 2-top, a 4-top, or a 6-top are going to take to turn, as they say. So tables of 2, 4, or 6, how long will it take you to eat?
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the early days of Tock. You said you had a chance to build it from the ground up. What was that like? Were you the first developer in the door? You were building the development team. How did that process happen?
Yeah, so I started. Day one was December 5th, 2014. It was it was obviously Nick, myself, our director of design, Dan. JJ, who I actually had worked with for 6 years at Google before that. He had left Google 6 months before me for a startup. And I so enjoyed working with JJ. I still do. And so he came and joined me on this. And so, day one, it was the four of us plus our current CFO, who was the CFO for the Alinea Group, in a room and a whiteboard and a lot of talking. Now, we did have a really great advantage, I think, which is A, restaurant experience in the house. B, we were in the office of a restaurant, which has its pluses and minuses because every day at 2:00 things would go bananas. And C, we had a prototype. We had our first one we could throw away. Nick had hired a PHP developer to whip up this, really sketchy piece of software to try and see if it worked. And it did. It barely worked. It wasn't scalable. It wasn't super fast. It wasn't configurable, et cetera. It took a lot of work to keep maintained, but is absolutely the right thing to do because he was in the restaurant business, not the software development business, A. And B, didn't know if it was going to work. They launched it April 23rd, 2011, and that day they sold $500,000 worth of bookings. He's like, this might have legs.
Not bad. Not bad.
Yeah.
And, that's we often talk in the startup business about how to utilize the right level of work at the right time. And how do you make sure that you actually do start with those wads of duct tape so that you can reassemble as you need to, or you can throw away. You don't get so lost in the weeds of building the perfect data model and all the rest of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I always say the faster you can get something out there, the faster you can figure out what you need next, because your customers are going to tell you what they need. Chris Simona, who I believe you know well, always says that, show me a company without tech debt, and I'll show you a company without customers.
I like
and
that.
So Well, I do think we do work to keep our tech debt manageable, and we're conscious about what we take on as far as tech debt. There's always going to be something like that, and there's times when you need to take a step back and sort of clean house a little bit and clean up, and then there's times where you just need to put the pedal down and go as fast as you can.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's easy for people to forget about debt is that not all debt's bad, right? You take debt on
Right.
in order to achieve certain things, and the same is true with tech debt.
Yeah. Yeah, so we had that since we had this prototype, we spent the first month literally in a conference room talking. We talked about what is the state of the industry? What does this current piece of software do? What do we wish it did? What do restaurants do? What do restaurants wish they did? Where do we see things in 2022? Now, mind you, in 2014, that seemed like a long ways out, but it's getting up there, right? But we really shot for where we still think things are going to be in the future, and that was really great. So we took this month of whiteboard sketches and everything, and then I sat down while JJ sort of started exploring tech stack stuff. We were just trying to decide, I think at the time, whether we were going to use Go or Java for our back end, and I sat down and okay, we'll put it all together and organized a bunch of index cards, put it together, and had our first project plan, which basically kept us busy for 2.5 years. But from the get-go, we didn't have any preconceptions about exactly what was going to come out. We had a lot of ideas about what we were going to do and what we weren't going to do, and there are many times where we'd come up to it and we'd be like, "Is this really the hill we want to die on?" A big thing in restaurant world is sort of a skeuomorphic view of the dining room, where it's we call it a bird's eye view, where you're looking down, you can see where all the tables are. And from a perspective of data viz, it's not great. There's only so much you can do with that. And we built a different version that was non-skeuomorphic that gave a lot of other info, but people were just like, "Well, where's my floor layout?" And after a few months of that, we were like, "Is this really a hill we want to die on?" And we're like, "No, I don't think so," and burped out the bird's eye view in a couple weeks. And then I think the next big hill we were convinced to die on is that we're not going to build an app. We didn't build an app. We still are not app centric. We have an app, and I'll explain that in a second. But my belief is that responsive web design is the way to go. That is the future. That is the way to get the most bang for your buck. And we said, yeah, this is a hill we wanted to die on. But we got enough folks saying, well, you don't have an app. Well, you don't need an app. You could be anywhere in the world and just hit our website and make a purchase. Our website is super fast, loads up even in Australia on a cable modem in a second and a half, the front page. And every subsequent click is going to be 17 milliseconds. I know, because I'm big on metrics for latency. So you don't need an app, but people still wanted an app. So we finally decided, well, time to do an app. So we used Apache Cordova and burped out an app in 6 weeks, an iOS app and an Android app. And those are basically wrappers around our website. So we can continue iterating on the website. All these changes that we make to our responsive web design, we test them, we push them, and they wind up in these apps. So, there's a lot of these types of decisions you make. Is this something really, really important to us?
Right. And even once you do decide it's important, it's also really interesting how you decide at what level do you go into, because,
Right.
I would argue if you're trying to do a productivity app or something else like that, native is still the way to go on mobile devices. You still get a lot of extra things. But if you're talking about what you're doing, then the lines get a lot more blurry, especially since the customers that you're having to delight are actually the restaurant side first. The customers are important, but you have a clear set of needs here, and you probably don't have a complex interface that you have to show people to the world on your mobile devices. So ergo, the choice makes sense.
Yeah, and what it comes down to is what's the lowest bar to get people to book on a restaurant? There's if you've got a restaurant group with 200 restaurants, maybe people are going to use an app, but for the most part, people don't really want to download something. They just want to get where they want to go. And so our goal is to basically make that as smooth as possible. From I heard of Duncan's fancy new restaurant to I booked a table at Duncan's fancy new restaurant. Just that easy.
Yeah.
And making that funnel as short as possible. And downloading an app is a huge road bump.
Right.
Huge.
Well, I mean, the last time I was in the States, I was running around to a couple different restaurant chains, and they were like, "Hey, let's download our app." And it's like, go to Chipotle, download our app. Go to Bob's Pizza Place, download our app. It's like, oh, really? I'm already irritated. I have 4 airlines as different apps on my system. What do I need another one for?
Yeah, I'm very, like, having been around for a long time, I'm very, like, sort of cranky old man on the app front. I definitely want the apps to get off my lawn. But I mean, there are, as you said, productivity apps, and there are plenty of examples of that. Like, I'd say your mapping app in your phone is definitely something you want native. Like, I want my email app, that kind of thing. But for something that, most guests don't spend all day booking reservations. There are occasionally the concierges that do that, et cetera. But we're not really targeting them. And so forcing people to download something and then making sure that they update it and all these other version SKU and all this other stuff. It's just like, it's a nightmare, and it's a big investment. You want to talk about, like, keeping things lean. We don't have a cadre of mobile developers that we have to keep on staff for what we're doing. We basically have. And we started off hiring generalists. I've got that coming from Google, like, always looking for generalists. And, only recently in the last year or so have we sort of started to specialize sort of the front end, back end in that realm. And, last year we hired our first SRE, which was super exciting. So, it's always, and as well as in QA, I guess. So it's always sort of like, hire as conservatively as possible, get as much done with the team that you can. So, and of course, the smaller your team, the faster you can move because you have fewer communication nodes.
Right. So let's talk about building up your team. Obviously, it was just the core of you guys in the back of a restaurant for a little while, but then you've built. How many engineers are you up to now, or developers? I should say.
We're around about I think 20 to 25 between engineers and designers. We've got a very robust product design team, and that's bringing in Dan on day one as our director of product design was really, I think, a key hire, because he has built up a really brilliant team of product designers. And I think it shows in our product. If you go poking around exploretalk.com or take a look at it, it feels good. It's fast. It's thoughtfully designed, and it's beautiful. Like, a lot of it comes to that. So, we started off with Dan, and we hired a few more engineers right off the bat. I think, I always tell folks, you want to start with the most senior team that you can right off the bat. And, I hit the mother load between JJ and then Jacob and Robin came over from Google as well. And we hired a wonderful engineer named Jonathan, who came from the Bay Area to Chicago, win-win for Chicago. And, it's that core team is that's what got us over the edge to basically launch our first product. Launch Tock initially on June 2nd, 2015, which we did with a news crew in the office, which is a terrible idea. Nothing can make a big launch more stressful than PBS NewsHour roaming around over your shoulder with a camera.
Yeah, no pressure there. No pressure. Oh. Launches are so stressful. I wouldn't want anybody outside looking at me doing that. That's too private. Yeah. So, building the team was, it was always, we would just sort of assess, like, well, what do we need next? Are we at a point where we really need another engineer, that we can use another engineer? And of course, you're thinking about burn, and you're thinking about everything else. And so I think we grew in little spurts here and there, but we were always very careful to hire the right person, and not because we need to fill a seat. That's something I've learned. A lesson I've had to learn a number of times in my career, is to never lower your bar, and I think we've done a really good job of that, of keeping a high bar of folks. And that's not only means that, you're keeping a great team and hiring a great team at the same time. So it's a two-sided win, as far as I could say. Right. So, as you grew, what kind of thought did you put into how you structured your team? I mean, was it kind of obvious where the next hire should be, and then you'd look for there? Were you looking for the right people? Well, you already mentioned that you're looking for people first, but how did you structure them, and how did that structure evolve over time?
Well, I think we're still small enough that things are are kind of fluid, but it started off generalist for the longest time. And one thing that, given my background and and some of the stuff that I've done and I found interesting is I focus very hard on EQ, so people with high emotional intelligence, and a lot of it came down to me meeting with my director of engineering, my senior engineer, like, well, where are we? What do we think we need next? And it's usually like, we just need another great engineer in here. We need another great engineer. And then one day we started saying, we really need somebody with more front end engineering experience. We need somebody that really gets the front end, understands, JavaScript, CSS, like browser, whizzity whack stuff, and all the sort of peccadillos that come with the front end engineering. I'm like, great, okay, well, let's start poking around for that. And then we hit a day eventually where we're like, yeah, we just need a full-time SRE. We've got enough yaks to shave. Let's let's get a full-time yak shaver into here. And then the day came along where we're like, oftentimes my director of engineering would come to me and say, like, I think we need a QA person. I'm like, okay, well, do you want our next hire to be a QA person or another engineer? And be like, oh, let's hire another engineer. And like that was the same conversation we had for about a year. And finally, one day I was like, QA person or engineer? He's like, QA person. And we had this amazing QA person, Mieko, and she's just absolutely fantastic. Runs our build process and like makes sure that things are like, it basically, the whole world is in a better place, and the rest of the team is very happy as a result of that. So now we're looking at growing that team as well. And a lot of it just comes down to like, I think there was somebody back when I was at Apple. I think it was I want to say Kai, but I can't remember who it was. Said you want to cook something until it's smoking and then just a little bit less. And so like my take has always been you want to work until you're just a little bit like got a little bit too much work to do, and then hire right before that. Does that make sense?
Right. You have to almost guess when that moment's going to be so you can like hit it just before.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of companies like raise a bunch of money and just hire a bunch of people, and then assume everything's going to continue like going in a completely straight trajectory to the right, or going to hockey stick or something. Nick and I are we're not young people, and we've been doing our thing for quite some time, and people are human beings, man. Like this isn't just a business to them. This is their job. This is their livelihood. And so think very carefully about when you're hiring to make sure that it's a hire that works for both you and the person, but also that you're not going to be like, oh, well, we screwed up. We're just going to lay off a bunch of people one day. Because I don't know, I think take that kind of thing very seriously.
No, and as you should. I mean, the one of the things that I've really learned out of what's been happening in the last few months is how much you really are carrying people's lives, and how much responsibility that is. I mean, it's easy in the boom times to be like, hey, okay, somebody can go find a new job, or somebody is doing something, they're not happy here, right? Let's make sure they can go find a new job, but they need to be done here. Whereas like right now, it's like every person, it's like, well, even if there's all sorts of other issues, you're just being a human, right? You have to think about it from that perspective.
Absolutely.
We went through this with even our in-house care that we have for our son here. When she had to stay home, it's like, well, what are we going to do for her, right?
Right.
And I wasn't just going to like pocket the money and say, no, I get to save some money here, even though I have to deal with the fact that my wife and I now have full-time care of our kid. It's she's a person, she has a life, she has all these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I think people see that, and it helps you attract a really thoughtful group of folks as well. And when the time comes to hire somebody else, people are thoughtful about it. You're like, let's hold on, let's see how our next month goes, let's see how our trajectory goes, let's see what's happening, and be thoughtful about it. So I've never liked referring to people on my team as resources, and I never would. They're not just, people aren't in software engineering particularly, people aren't just plug and place replaceable bits. Like you get, it's important, I think, to document, to build broad institutional knowledge and not have single points of failure. But at the same point, everybody matters, everybody contributes to the team, and when it comes down to it, like people talk about like, well, how did you do what you did? Whether it's developing Tock, growing the team, or starting Tock to go over a long weekend, like that's the team. That's the team stepping up and doing that work, and they're the ones that really are making it happen.
Cool. So we've been bouncing around well, you mentioned several times Talk to Go, and
Yeah.
we've been bouncing around now. We talked a little bit about the whole thing going on in the world. When lockdown came, tell us about what happened at your company and how you thought about that whole process.
So we saw so let's back up a second. We've got currently thousands of restaurants using Tock in 28 or 29 countries. And so we saw this lockdown coming before a lot of people did in general, because our metrics showed it. We could start to see this up and to the right starting going down. And we're like, okay, something very bad is going to happen. And it's funny because, you try to prepare for a lot of scenarios when you have a company. And, I remember very distinctly at some point, our CFO saying, well, every restaurant in the world closed down, and we were all like, ha, 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 ha. And, here we are, every restaurant in the world is closing down. And, wow, that's super scary. Like, from a perspective of what are we going to have to do about this? Like, well, stop hiring, obviously, but is it going to be layoffs, salary cuts? Who knows? And then I think it was it the 12th? It was 2 months ago today that we started working from home. And so basically we're like, all right, literally decided in an afternoon, send everybody home, like take a monitor with you, take a desk chair, take what you need, take your laptop, because we don't know how long this is going to be. And the team went home, and we're looking at this. We had a couple restaurants that just started using Tock to book pickup experiences. And they took their front of house and made them into drivers, and then the back of house, and they started doing we had fancy restaurants doing burgers and fries, and people were just trying. Some restaurants just closed down and said, oh God, we're like, this is terrible. Other restaurants, like, we have to try something to keep our people employed. And so we're like, well, look, people are using our system to kind of do this. What can we do to really enable this to restaurants and bring all this sort of thought that we put behind time slotted booking and everything into a pickup and delivery type service? And so, I think Thursday, the team burped out a design doc. Friday, we reviewed it. And then Friday night, they started coding. And then on Monday, we had our first restaurant using it. And that was 2 months ago. We've got, I think, almost 1,000 restaurants using it today. Completely new product. And most of these restaurants are new customers to us too. But what it is basically, it's from your perspective as a guest, you just go on a Tock to explore.talk.com/to-go, find a restaurant that you like, and you can either do a pickup or delivery order, and it labels which one they are. And you can basically not just choose what you want, but if you ever book anything for pickup or delivery, it's always ASAP, ASAP, ASAP. You can sometimes say, well, an hour and a half, but no one ever really does that. No one ever says, well, yeah, I'm going to order this 3 hours ahead. And so as a result, you wind up with this peak at 7 o'clock. You have a kitchen that's completely bored at 5 o'clock. 7:30, they're running around with their hair on fire in the weeds. And so that super popular place, you as a guest think, I'm really hungry, probably not going to get here for 75 minutes. So I really want to order from them. I'm going to order from this other place that I don't like as much, but I know the food's going to arrive in 35 minutes. So we've already got this big time-based booking system. So the way that we laid it out is, how do most restaurants run a kitchen? Most restaurants that aren't primarily to-go restaurants. And that isn't, we just do this short order, run around like crazy at peak times. It's, we can serve this many people at a time. So if you're making bookings at a restaurant that does time-slotted bookings because they've got a lot of demand, they can seat 10 people this time, 20 people at this time, 25 people at this time, back to 10, and then there's a little lull where they can seat anybody for half an hour, back to 10, et cetera. And so they wind up with multiple peaks in their day. Or if they plan things just right and they've got a lot of demand, they can have just like a flat bar, which is amazing. So we built the Tock to Go to be able to say, hey, I can serve this many orders or this many people meals per 15-minute break, and you can customize that. And so what restaurants discovered very quickly, as people would do, is they realized they could book this stuff in advance. It's a different world right now. People are planning everything differently since they're not going out on Friday or Saturday. And so we found that people are planning weekdays well in advance, 2, 3, 4 days in some cases. And so they'll go and they'll like, oh yeah, I want to eat at 7. Oh, 7's not available, but 6:45 is. I'll book that. And the next person comes, 6:45 is full too, 6:30. So people wind up filling that shoulder. So instead of having this giant peak, you've got this plateau that goes right under their capacity. And so that works out really well, not just for the fact that the kitchen's not going nuts, but it works out really well given the fact that with social distancing and everything, in many cases, people are walking in line to stand in line on the street or driving up, you can get this nice rhythm. You can get things going very smoothly. Alinea, again, Nick's restaurant here, I think they did 1,200 covers on Friday night, okay? And the average wait, I think, was 4 minutes. So you've got like a line of cars coming up, people coming up, and there's somebody like, get your last name, someone else coming out, and they're all wearing masks, put it in your trunk, and off you go. And so, the team built that, and we weren't sure, we had no idea how well it was going to do or how poorly it was going to do. We just knew we had to do something to help these restaurants that were determined to stay alive, to open up with a smaller staff and do what they can to at least keep the lights on. Because people, even with rent abatement, you still got to pay some rent. You've got to pay some health insurance if you furlough people. And then you've got all these people that don't have jobs. So, Nick opened Alinea 3 days after. They closed it for 3 days, opened it up again, and they think they were doing beef Wellingtons. And I think they sold 400 or 500 of those a night. And then they just all right, we're just going to crank it up. Now, Alinea is a amazingly fancy restaurant with these 20-course meals that take hours, and they would serve a little over 100 people a night. Now they're serving 1,200 people a night because this is what you have to do to make it happen. Nick and Grant realized that we have to do something. We have a responsibility to all these employees that work here in these restaurants. So I think that's been the really exciting part about this. I've always been one for mission-driven work, and so we talk about launching quickly. And not only do we launch this quickly and get this out there as quickly as we can, but then you keep the pedal down and, okay, we need this other feature. We need to do this other thing. We've got more restaurants that want to do menu style sales instead of just a prefix menu. Although I will say, given this new weird world we're living in, we've got a lot of restaurants who discovered every week just do a different $20 or $30 meal. 3 courses, don't do a short order kitchen with a la carte. And you design your kitchen to basically crank out as much of that at highest quality you possibly can. Then you throw a few add-ons, like maybe a bottle of wine or, some other type of extra dessert or something fun like that. And people will upsell themselves from the comfort of their own home. So a lot of it was leveraging our existing infrastructure, leveraging the team across the whole company. And this is the whole company pivot because this means suddenly support has a different way of doing things. Sales is working very differently. Account management is working like crazy. So the whole company really stepped up here. We really leveraged all this stuff we'd built, but now is the time to take on some tech debt. And we have taken on some tech debt here. And it's very willingly, and we're starting to figure out okay, now how are we going to keep this fast pace of innovation and adding these new features and this sense of urgency, and at the same time start to pay off a little bit of that stuff that we did at the very beginning.
So, when you're looking at what tech debt to take on and how, what's a good example when you're trying to make this quick engineering effort, and obviously those first few days when you went from Thursday to Friday to Saturday to Sunday to Monday. I'm sure people are throwing a lot of duct tape around and just kind of getting stuff done. Were you just in this mode where you were just doing what it takes and then you figure out later what you just did and how much tech that you had? Or was there places where you had conversations, oh yeah, we're going to do something really gnarly here, but then we'll take care of that?
Yeah, I think it's throw it to do in the code and move along. And basically, we still QA our launches. We still test our launches because we still have a bunch of restaurants. When at the time we were launching this, we're still trying to do ordinary reservations and bookings and prefix and stuff like that. So you can't break it. So a lot of it was just, okay, it's okay to do this thing without really thinking through all the repercussions or edge cases. It's okay, this might not be performant. It's okay. We'll keep an eye on the graphs and see where it goes. Oh yeah, there's this thing over here, and then 2 days later you get that fixed and stuff like that. So it's when you've got a good structure, and I think we do have a very good structure, and you've got basically a really smart team that's very dedicated. The debt isn't crippling tech debt. It's more like a series of there's smear paint on the trim over here and somebody broke a window over here. It's not oh my God, the back of the house fell down. And so that's that's, I think, and the real key on this comes down to, like, people often ask me, like, what makes a great team? I think a great team isn't defined by a team that just writes great software. A great team is great by a team that responds to changing requirements very quickly, and when something breaks, can determine what it is, figure out the root cause, and fix it quickly without freaking out or panicking or not being able to figure out what's wrong.
Right. No, that's entirely true. It's the people who somehow get ice in their veins when everything's on fire, that you want.
Yeah, I mean, I remember very clearly the very first outage we had with New Tock. It was December of 2015. We were doing a big ticket launch for Next Restaurant that does. It was a bit of code that we hadn't completely tested because it was season tickets. They were selling, you buy something for the first quarter to the second quarter, third quarter, et cetera. So you buy 4 different experiences and you pay for it all at the beginning of the year. It's sort of like, opera tickets or something. And we went down, and it was scary because this was a big sale. This was like millions of dollars. And it's a very important sale for this restaurant, which happened to be one of Nick's restaurants. But the room got very quiet. People started focusing very clearly on what are the problems, what do we need to fix, what's the root cause. We're going to do a postmortem, but for now, what does it take to get things back up? And it turned out there were 3 different root causes that came together here to cause this outage. And it was, I think it still might be one of our biggest outages. But we came back, fixed all the code. They did the ticket launch the next day, smooth as silk. But that was a really important lesson for the team, and it also really established a precedent. I do have the honor, as my team will remind you, of the very first postmortem. I deleted a production database for our prototype system. My team will never let me forget that. I'm sure they'll come and like spray paint it on my gravestone after I die. But I wrote the very first postmortem for Tock. This was another big one, and now we've got a folder full of them. And that root cause analysis is, I mean, all this, of course, but that's key to being able to move fast. Is you don't want to blame the person that pushed the button. You want to figure out what are the steps that led them to think it was okay to push the button in the first place.
Right, because nobody actually wants to crash the site. Nobody wants to drop the database. Nobody wants to rm minus rf / right, and kill the entire server. Well, okay, maybe some people want to do that, but nobody on your team wants to do this. And so, being, again, it comes back to A, accepting that we're all human, but B, accepting that we're all working together towards something, or embracing that we're all working together towards something and doing the right thing.
And that enables you to move a lot more quickly. If every time someone's checking in a line of code or doing a push, they're like, oh, I'm going to get yelled at, I'm going to get fired if this doesn't work well, people stop doing it. Like, they don't, even unconsciously in many cases. So it's really key.
Yeah. No, I think I can remember several projects where I was at where people would get, or we'd have those kind of characters on the team that would be yelly and screamy or blamey. And that will really shut you down fast. Yeah. So, did you have any incidents when you were doing this Tock to Go pivot? Oh, I mean, we've pushed some bugs, sure. Like, we've absolutely had to do I think we usually try to push at least twice a week, but we were pushing daily for a long time, if multiple times a day for 2-3 weeks. It was bananas. And there's a lot of like, oh, that broke, fix that. Oh, that just broke, like, oh, this button, why is this floating over here? Why does this look like this? And it was a little, coming along. But the interesting thing about this is that folks have been, for the most part, like, very understanding around that. I mean, we certainly don't intend to do that, continue doing it. We don't like to do that. But, in this time, one thing that I have seen is a lot of people being like, oh, okay, this is a weird time. Like, you fix that. Thanks a lot. And we have a chat channel internally called Talk Love that we have folks post, nice things that people say to us. And it's just been like a ticker tape of stuff lately because restaurants are so appreciative. And, one thing from the get-go, it's important to us as being in the hospitality business, is providing really great hospitality to our customers, the restaurants. In fact, we call our support team the hospitality team for that very reason. And
I think they're not used to that. They're often used to dealing with vendors that are just jerks or ignore them. And people were just amazed, like, oh my gosh, we found this thing, it isn't working. And, our hospitality team finds it, they get a touch of engineering on call, and 20 minutes later, they're like, yeah, thank you so much. We fixed it now. And they're like, wait, you fixed it already? And people are asking like, oh my God, we need this feature. They're clamoring for this or that. And like, 4 days later, we launched that feature. They're like, what just happened? Like, what world is this? How are you doing this? And, we can't do everything for everyone, but a lot of this has to do with like keeping your eyes out and listening to what's coming in from where. And so that's a really neat thing.
Well, I'm also as you describe it and talk about it, I also think that there has to be some credit given to the fact that you spent the last however many years building this team and getting them to function together and having all the parts, really knowing who each other are and what they're
out and see what people can crank out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, it's really cool to hear.
It's super exciting. It's a wild time.
So as you go forward, I mean, is this, I think I know the answer to this question based on what you said before, but is this kind of a permanent change or a permanent addition to your business now, do you think?
Oh, yeah. I don't think it's going to go away. In fact, I would argue that I think the hard part's yet to come. The hard part is yet to come. Stopping an object in motion is challenging, but somewhat easy. Getting it started again is always. There was a guy I worked with at Apple, Steve Heyman. You may have met Steve. He was a character. He flew. That guy flies a lot, or flew a lot. He doesn't fly anywhere, but he would always say that like people would talk about being scared of flying, whatever, not or scared of the landing. He's like, I'm never scared of the landing because I know the plane can fly. He's like, I'm scared of the takeoff. He's like, because you don't know if this thing's going to stay up in the air. And so I think the takeoff and ramp up is going to be a big challenge for businesses and restaurants, because we're seeing restaurants open up in some states in the U.S. with requirements that they only have 25% capacity. Now, most restaurants rely on being completely full at least 2 nights a week to make ends meet, and then hopefully 25 or 50% the rest of the week. So being open all week at 25% capacity ain't going to cut it. That's going to be a real challenge. And on top of that, you're going to have a lot of people that aren't ready to go out and sit in a restaurant. So what we're going to see is this slow increase of people going out to dine, while at the same time still having to maintain this pickup and delivery service and takeout. Like that is going to be a real challenge for businesses. And so we're already thinking about like, what can we do to our product to make that easier? Because now you've got a lot of these restaurants didn't do takeout. Like that's what we're seeing here. We're now seeing restaurants that didn't do takeout and delivery. We as Tock are starting to see restaurants that have never done reservations calling us to say we need to do reservations, because some places are saying they're going to require contact tracing, meaning you have to put a list of everybody in your party that's coming in and their phone numbers. We don't know where that's going to go or how that's going to work out. We've got some places are talking about the fact that you have to limit the number of people that come throughout the day or the number of people that come at any given time. And so anyway, there's all this stuff. So we're seeing people doing a lot of stuff that they've never done with their hospitality businesses, and we're already trying to sort of meet that need. So it's keep that pedal down all the way to the floor.
So let's as I wrap these up, I actually have a few questions I've started asking everybody as they go along. A little bit of fun here at the end. What's the thing that you've missed the most while you've been in lockdown?
Oh, wow. Just people, like my friends. Like I've got a lot of friends. I see a lot of people. I totally missed that. I had something happen last week that I haven't had happen in like 20 years. I was craving a donut. I don't really eat donuts, but I was reading a book that they were talking about donuts, and I'm like, oh my God, I want a donut. And so there is a cafe in our neighborhood that does this like enter through one door, exit through the other, 5 people in there max and stuff like that. And so my wife picked me up a couple donuts. Like it's a tiny little thing, but I was literally eating this donut dancing around the house.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What's the unexpected pleasure that you found out of all this? What thing has surprised you that you've actually enjoyed about this time period?
Sweatpants. Got to be sweatpants.
Are you currently wearing sweatpants?
I am absolutely currently wearing sweatpants. 100%. I am wearing pants. Yeah, just like I think while our work is sped up and other things have slowed down, I think that the one thing for me is just some sort of a little bit of time to think and reflect beyond what this is, and be grateful, I think, for what I have and what we have, and to take a look at, and I see a lot of my friends doing this. What can we do to help? Some people are sewing masks. Some people, my friend Jeff, designed this flat pack laser cut face mask thing, this plastic mask that literally it's like a 2-minute laser cut and you pop it all out and boop, wrap it around your head. It's amazing. Seeing people help out in ways that they can, while other people are still having a really hard time. So I think a lot of it is gratitude, frankly.
That's a really good answer. I mean, and one thing we haven't talked about here, in this session has been, you actually have a nice viewpoint onto some of this being part of the ORD camp community in Chicago, all the makers and all the people doing crazy stuff like this. Yeah, and that's got to be so awesome to watch.
Yeah, it's really great.
What's the if you could go back and tell yourself one thing in January, one thing, what would that be? Besides selling all your stocks, I mean,
No, oh God, it would probably be take better care of yourself. Really, one thing I've worked on is really doubling down on eating better, exercising every day, since I don't really get out and walk and stuff to get to work and whatnot. Sleeping, meditating. Like I've really managed to focus on those things when I can. Before I really wasn't probably as much as I should have. And so I came in as a little less prepared than I could have been. So that probably would have been the biggest prep there, like just on a very high level.
And take it back to your team. How do you really, I mean, what are you thinking about doing to help them through that the same way? Like, how are you thinking about how to get your team to take better care of themselves in the same way that you're thinking about taking care of yourself?
Yeah, that's a real challenge. I think that while we're encouraging them to think fast, think carefully, work hard, work fast, launch quickly, launch often. I think still at the same time, we understand that you gotta take care of yourself, because if you fail, if your body fails, you're out of luck. Like you're out of commission entirely. So do what you can to hit that peak of productivity, and a lot of that does come down to like taking care of yourself. And it's really hard. People are home with, as like with kids or with other kids that understand what's going on, especially younger ones, and so everybody has different challenges.
Yeah, no. My little one runs around here sometimes saying, "I hate COVID. I hate COVID. I hate COVID," like it's a person or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so one last question. What advice would you tell somebody who was in the startup world, but who was not necessarily at a company like Tock that had figured out, okay, this is what we're doing next and all, and they're kind of looking at that need to change, right? I mean, this is the story of all startups. Some make it, some don't. Some figure their way through the maze, some don't. But the people involved, since we've been talking about people being so important, what piece of advice do you think you would give somebody like that?
I think there's two things. One is something that my partner Nick does really well, that I actually would like to improve more at, is seeing the world as it is versus how you wish it were. He's very good at that, and very pragmatic when it comes to that, and I think that's a great strength. I think the other, and with that in mind, I would say take a step back and look at how you can help. Well, what can your company, your product do to help other people through this? Like, what do folks need the most? And I think that lens, I think, is really what helped us get this thing cranked out quickly. We don't know that everything could be completely different in a week or a month or two. We don't know where things are going. Right now, things look really good. It's helping a lot of businesses keep people employed, keep people fed. It's another thing to remind people is that, we don't have a food supply system that's built to feed everybody through grocery stores and cooking at home. People eat a certain percentage of meals out, no matter what their socioeconomic status. So look to help and try and see the world as it is how I would say.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming on and being part of this little journey that we're doing over the course of 10 sessions through June. It means so much to me that you were able to spend some time with us and catch up.
Thanks. Couldn't tell you how happy I am to chat with you. Like, this is super wonderful.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
And then for everybody else listening, we'll cut the feed in a second, but I do want to say that we have Laura Hogan coming on next week. Next week is going to be a very busy week for a lot of us at Microsoft because we've got the Build conference coming up, and events are rough things to try to do right now, but we're doing this crazy 48-hour event around the clock, streamed everywhere. It's nuts. But in the middle of all this, we're also going to have a conversation with Laura Hogan, who I cannot wait to talk to because she's also one of my heroes when it comes to this leadership stuff. So
yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Wow.
That'll be great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will say sayonara to everybody online. Why did I just say sayonara? That sounds like so lame. I should say just goodbye, good evening, good night.
See you next week.
See you next week. And thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Bye-bye.